Hello and welcome back to the Jacob and Jacob podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Robum, joined as always by my co-host, Jacob Hare. And it's good to be back. It's been a while since we've done an interview, and today we have a very special guest, the radio play-by-play voice of the Vegas Golden Knights, Dan D'Uva. Dan, thank you so much for being here today.
Jacob, it's very good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So I want to start by asking you about last season and what it was like to have to broadcast games from a studio and not being able to actually be at the rink when the team was on the road. Could you go into that experience a little bit? Sorry.
Yeah. It was a surprise to us that it worked out as well as it did. And I'm thinking first about the bubble when the Stanley Cup playoffs occurred in the summer months, end of July, August, and September. And the teams went to Toronto in the Eastern Conference and Edmonton for the Western Conference. And the team went and the broadcasters did not. There were some national broadcasters that went, but as the team broadcasters on the radio for the Golden Knights, we were in Las Vegas and we had to construct a makeshift studio. We used a production studio that the Golden Knights use for, team photos and, videos like that and headshots. And we set up, there were 3 60-inch TVs, a couple of desks. Our radio engineers brought our regular radio equipment to this place and created sort of a makeshift studio. And then the question would be, is this going to work? And for the most part, it did. Of course, it doesn't come close to approximating the real thing, being in an arena, being around a team. It's not just calling the games off the screen. It's everything you miss from being around players, being around coaches. We get so much from those people that's not in a formal interview, just in a conversation in the hallway or having dinner with somebody. There's just so much that you miss when you're not having normal conversations, as we all now know, but particularly when it's your job, as it is in broadcasting. I think we accomplished the technical hurdles relatively well so that when the next season began in January of 2021, it's hard to get the years straight, that we were hopeful that it would not continue. It did for about a month. So the first month or so of the season, we were doing the home games in T-Mobile Arena when the Golden Knights were at home. And when the team was on the road, we went back into this makeshift studio. Then middle of February, when the Golden Knights went to Lake Tahoe for the outdoor game, we traveled for that, broadcast that game in person from Rinkside, which was great. And shortly thereafter, we began, at least the radio side, we began traveling again to the destinations that would allow us. And I think only one place by the end of the year were we, because of local restrictions, not allowed to go. But, we went to St. Louis, we went to Minnesota, we went to Anaheim, and when the playoffs started, back to St. Paul, Minnesota, to Denver for the second round, and even to Montreal for the third round. So as I say, just about a month or so into last season, we began to pivot back towards something approximating normal. And now this year, that is a remote broadcaster in the rearview mirror. I hope never to have to do it again, at least not because of a pandemic. It's good to have that ability should we need to for some reason. But the challenges we knew we would overcome, but that didn't mean it wasn't the same, right? So we knew that we were going to miss stuff, but it was better than not doing it at all.
So you mentioned the game in Lake Tahoe between the Golden Knights and the Avalanche. That game was paused for several hours. What was it like waiting through that pause? Was it sort of like a bit uneasy, waiting, obviously wanting to watch the game and get to finish calling it? What was that like?
Yeah, the longest intermission I've ever been a part of. It wasn't so much nervous. First of all, it was a beautiful day. Normally you think about a weather-related delay and there's rain or thunder or wind or something really awful. Having spent many summers in Cape Cod, fog can really screw up baseball games. But here it was the sun. It was a gorgeous day. So after the game was paused, again, the sun was too prevalent so that the ice was getting mushy. I just kind of hung out. They had some boxed lunches for us. So I just sat outside. Remember, it's a beautiful golf course. Lake Tahoe is a couple of 100 feet away. I loved it for an hour or so. It was like hanging out in the park. So then I went back to the team hotel and I figured I'd I'd take a nap or something like that. By coincidence, it was my birthday. So I had one of my very good friends, who was watching the game, figured I'd have some free time, dialed me up on the FaceTime and decided this would be a great opportunity to hang out with me on my birthday. So some friends had gotten together at this guy's house and they decided they were going to try to play cards with me. I was like, this was just as I was laying down to try to take a nap. But hey, they're trying to be good friends on my birthday. So they tried to play cards, but as you can imagine, to play cards with someone who's not physically in the same room, a lot of problems are created. So that's what I remember about the pause. And just by the time the FaceTime call was over, I realized, well, I really can't take a nap anymore. I should probably get dressed again and then go back over to the rink. They had shuttle buses for us. The big change, of course, was the temperature. It had gone from a beautiful, nice, sunny day to a frigidly cold evening. So 3 pairs of socks that I had with me went onto the feet, and those were not enough. So by the time we started, it must have been, it was about 9 o'clock by the time the second period started. I found out afterwards they had portable heaters installed for the benches, for the players and the coaches, but not for the broadcasters. So there we are calling the game ringside. But I really, at that point, I was just excited to be calling hockey. And I thought from the Golden Knights standpoint that any kind of change would be good. They were so bad in that first period, the ice conditions aside, and maybe that break would allow them to regroup. It sort of did, but it wasn't enough, and they lost the game. But I had so much throwback in my mind, whereas in high school, when I was broadcasting my high school's hockey games, some rinks we went to did not have bleachers. So calling the games from rinkside was a regular thing. I hadn't had that perspective in a while since I was 18 years old. So it was neat to be at that perspective again. And then I thought of, well, here we are under the lights. Normally you don't play high school hockey under the lights, but you do play high school football under the lights. And I had broadcast my high school's football games. So it was like this weird cross between high school hockey and high school football. Remember, there's no fans. And, we had good crowds in high school football games, but it's not like it was a 20,000 seat stadium or anything. Anyway, I had a lot of nostalgia thinking back to those moments and a nice callback to the roots of my broadcasting aspirations. So I hope that answers your question, Jacob. It was a fun day, and I don't think there was really any anxiety. The first thing that I always want to know when I get to a broadcast location is, A, where's the scoreboard? Because I got to know where the time and the clock and the score is, especially at a brand new rink and a makeshift rink at that, at Lake Tahoe. And secondly, is the radio engineer all set up and connected? We've had it happen a couple of times where the radio station can't get us or we can't get the radio station. If I know we're connected and we're going to be on the air and I can see the clock and the score, then I'm all set. Everything else, I'll figure out as we go.
So I want to move on to your first season with the Golden Knights, and it was actually the first season of the Golden Knights as a franchise. So what was it like to be the first person to be the broadcaster for the Golden Knights?
A humbling responsibility, because it's not only the first hockey team at the NHL level in the city, it was the first major league sports team in Las Vegas. There had been college sports, there had been minor league sports, and big events have come to Las Vegas, but it never had its own major league team. So to think about that it was the NHL, it just so happens to be the sport that keeps giving me jobs, that I thought of that as a real special thing. You would not have associated Las Vegas with the National Hockey League. If you were to guess which major league would end up in Vegas first, you might have guessed basketball because there's a WNBA team here. Maybe you think football. Of course, the Raiders have made the move, and maybe even baseball. There's been AAA ball here for a while. The Oakland A's are exploring a move to Vegas. Probably hockey was last on that list from the major 4 sports, but here it was. And maybe I should have realized that because hockey and moving into some non-traditional markets, how successful it's been in Nashville, successful in Tampa, et cetera, et cetera. So to be in that position was just a humbling honor that, having been part of some ventures with new clubs in the past, from starting my high school broadcasting thing a million years ago to starting a broadcasting program at the Cape Cod League. Just even when I was a student, no one had ever broadcast Syracuse softball until I thought it was a good idea buddy of mine and I decided, well, we should do that. And on and on and on. I think there's something to be said for being part of a new venture, and I had experience in that. And you sort of lay the groundwork. There's not an exact playbook. You have to trust your experience and make decisions based upon what you feel is right, in contrast to trying to follow in the footsteps of somebody else. And I just think of a couple other guys who started in the NHL around the same time that I did. Brendan Burke with the New York Islanders, terrific broadcaster, but he was coming in after Howie Rose, who's an incredible announcer. And then you look at Los Angeles, Alex Faust taking over for Bob Miller. Bob is one of the legendary figures in hockey broadcasting. Alex and Brendan are tremendous broadcasters and friends. But I felt in a certain way, I kind of lucked out because I could sort of chart my own path. I didn't have to worry about filling in for Bob Miller or for Howie Rose. Of course, they've done a tremendous job handling those responsibilities. But it was also putting myself aside. It was about bringing major leagues and hockey in particular to Las Vegas. And the country has seen how much the community here supports the Golden Knights and how the Golden Knights embrace the community, especially with what happened on October 1st and tragedy there. I was a kid in New Jersey when September 11th happened as a Mets fan, seeing the home run that Mike Piazza hit. And then a couple weeks later when it's the World Series and George Bush throws out that perfect first pitch before a World Series game, just how pivotal and meaningful Major League sports were to a wounded city and helped very much advance the healing process. And Las Vegas had never had that before. And the Golden Knights arrived just in time. I mean, literally just in time. The last preseason game for the Golden Knights ended just before the tragedy took place. And then, of course, the regular season started a couple of days later. So the timing was incredible. And I just shudder to think about what might have been, how much harder it would have been for Vegas had the Golden Knights not been here. The community bought into the Golden Knights bought into the community, and it's been very special to be part of that ride. And we didn't know that was going to turn into a Stanley Cup Finals run, and we didn't know they'd get to the third round 3 times in 4 years. But even if they had not been a winning team, it has still been a great honor to be the first broadcaster here and to have been part of it with so many great people.
So going into the first season, the Golden Knights actually made the Stanley Cup, as you just said, but in the history of sports, expansion teams have not been so successful in their first seasons. So going into that first year, what was your expectations like? And to see them make the Stanley Cup, how impressed were you with them?
I remember reading a story written by terrific writer Scott Burnside in breaking down the entire league, all 31 teams going into that season. And in breaking down the Golden Knights, he, like many, were critical of the assemblage of roster. he said that the team would be weak down the middle, and that was perhaps their greatest concern. Weak down the middle, nobody at the center position to really write home about. And William Karlsson went out and scored 43 goals that year. So I can't say, Jacob, I really had expectations. You assume that the team is not going to be a candidate for a Stanley Cup. No, I didn't. I never thought that would happen. But I also wasn't sure that they were going to be dreadful. When you're starting a new team and with all the resources that were put in place here, you figured they'd be exciting. I don't know how many games they're going to win, but this is going to be fun. Plus, you got MarcAndre Fleury, who now is the third winningest goalie in the history of the sport. I knew a couple of players from the minor leagues and other teams, so I knew I was going to get along with the team. I knew I was going to enjoy working with the other broadcasters they'd hired. So I had expectations of, like, this is going to be fun. This is going to be cool, and who knows what we're going to experience. I never really had a number like, oh, they're going to win this number of games, or they're going to get this far in the playoffs. I just didn't think about it that way. But then as the season went along, week after week, month after month, they kept on winning. You thought, wow, this isn't a fluke. Like this could catch on. We heard so much about the Vegas flu. Teams were coming to town and enjoying themselves a little bit too much. And maybe there was some truth to that. But, it kept on happening. And then when Drew Doughty had some not so nice things to say about the Golden Knights around New Year's Eve, And Drew said, we'll see who's in first place at the end of the season. Turned out it was the Golden Knights. Knights play the Kings in the first round. And what happens? Vegas sweeps Los Angeles. And Kings have not played a playoff game since then. So now all of that to sum up, Jacob, I did not really have performance expectations around the team. I knew and embraced the idea that it was going to be a fun first year, and it sure was.
So I want to shift and talk some hockey about the Golden Knights this season. Obviously, coming off of a deep playoff run, not as far as the Knights and their fans would have liked, but a good run nonetheless. And now, obviously, this season the expectations are sky high. They have a Stanley Cup on their mind. But 2 games in here, Max Pacioretty goes down. Mark Stone also waiting to see how long he's going to be out. But both injuries that are of major concern to this team and their ability to win going forward. How do you think those 2 injuries are going to impact this team, especially this early on?
I thought about what Paul Maurice said back in 2017 about the Golden Knights when MarcAndre Fleury was injured in game number 4. Vegas had won the first 3 in Dallas, Arizona on the road, Arizona at home, and then at home against Detroit. Anthony Mantha from the Red Wings got Fleury in the head with his knee, and Fleury would be out for 2 months. We didn't know how long at the time, but Vegas had to figure out how to play and how to win without MarcAndre Fleury. So what Paul Maurice said, head coach of the Jets, that what happened to the Golden Knights, Fleury's injury, everybody else had to figure out how to come together, how to step up, and that would have eventually happened, but the process was accelerated by the injury to Fleury. So the team got much better and became much closer and more synergistic, to use a fancy word, than they might have been otherwise if not for Fleury's injury. Of course, you didn't want Fleury to get injured, but the way it worked out, obviously, you can't argue. So I wonder if these players going down, because they've been without Pacioretty before, they've been without Stone before, but never really at the same time. The good news is it's a full 82-game season this year, which we haven't had the last 2 years. So you figure Pacioretty will be back, and they say about 6 weeks. Stone we're not sure about yet. And the good news is that there were some injured players from training camp who appear poised to return to the lineup. It was funny to see that there were more defensemen than forwards available for the first practice after game 2. so that was strange. That doesn't happen too often. So I think there's an opportunity for some guys who would be considered depth players to step up and, as I say, rise to the occasion, figure things out more quickly than had the Knights had their full roster, right? You're pressed into a challenge, and, who rises to the occasion. We'll see. That's the fun of it. Somebody's going to score goals. Who's going to be that person? Will it be the Marchessault, Smith, and Carlson line that's done it so often in the first few years? Or will it be a newcomer like Nolan Patrick, who needed a change of scenery after a few years with the Flyers? I don't know. We'll see.
All right. So you talk about Mark Stone, you talk about Pacioretty, and you talked about the line of Jonathan Marchessault, Riley Smith, William Karlsson, and how they've been a very good scoring line in the past. I want to ask about a specific player that could also step up with the loss of his line mates, Pacioretty and Stone, Chandler Stephenson. How has he grown really in the last season and now into this season? He's become a really great player and a key player for the Golden Knights. What do you expect of him with Stone and Pacioretty both out?
More speed. That's Stevenson's game when Pacioretty and Stone are healthy. Jim McKenzie, longtime NHL person, now a scout for the Golden Knights. I remember him telling me, I think the Golden Knights were in St. Louis a couple years ago. It was the year that Stephenson was acquired from the Capitals in December. And I remember thinking, well, he was a fourth-line guy for the Washington Capitals. How's he going to fit in with this Golden Knights team? Fourth line's in pretty good shape. And lo and behold, they didn't see him as a fourth-line guy. They saw him as someone who could play higher up in the lineup. And that's exactly what he's done. So I think that he has transformed his game from the player he was at Hershey in the American League when I saw him way back when, the Washington Capitals player that he was in 2018 Stanley Cup champion. And that has taken it to the point where even at practice with the Golden Knights skating without Pacioretty, without Stone, they during practice, not morning skates, not at games, but during regular practices, they put different colored jerseys on different lines. So with the Golden Knights, the fourth line wears yellow, the third line wears dark blue, the second line wears maroon, and the first line wears white. Now, without Pacioretty and without Stone, I think it'd be fair to say that all of a sudden, whoever goes there is not going to be the first line anymore. Right now, all of a sudden, Marchessault, Carlson, and Smith, they're going to be the first line based on time on ice, etc. But Pete DeBoer, the head coach of the Golden Knights, kept Chandler Stephenson in white and put a couple other guys with him. And again, it's not the same as Pacioretty and Stone, but it was important for Pete DeBoer to signal to Chandler Stephenson, you're still the first line center, even if these guys are substitutes for Pacioretty and for Stone. So Brett Howden, Evgeny Dodonov, those guys are not replacements for Pacioretty and Stone. They're simply fill-ins for now. And I thought that was an interesting choice, rather than, giving Stephenson the idea that he's being demoted. Other guys are getting promoted to play with him. I think that's a significant thing that maybe some other coaches might not have thought about. I hadn't really thought of it, but and then I noticed it during practice. So I think that Stephenson, he's, to be effective, he needs to continue doing what he has done with Pacioretty and with Stone, which is, show off the speed, middle lane drive, skate up the middle of the ice. When someone like Chandler Stephenson, he's fast, but he's not small, right? He's fast and he's got some size, not so much in height, but in his strength. I mean, he's a strong guy. So when you're a defenseman and you're skating backwards and you've got Stephenson skating right at you, I mean, you're on your heels, literally. That, I think, can be a point of emphasis for Stephenson. He can use the speed, but if he's not forcing the opposition back on its heels, I think that's when he gets into trouble. So we'll see how it works out with Howden and Dodonov, presumably for the upcoming games. But I think that Stephenson is in a spot where he's got confidence, having been with Pacioretty and Stone the last couple of years. I remember Jay Beagle, who had been the centerman for Stephenson's line in Washington. Beagle had moved on and was with the Canucks, and he told me a couple of years ago, he knew how good Chandler Stephenson would be, but he didn't want to tell anybody because then they'd take him off of his line in Washington. And somebody eventually figured it out. Turned out it was the Golden Knights.
It's a good story. So earlier you talked about MarcAndre Fleury, obviously how in that first season he had the injury, missed a lot of time, and now this past summer, in what some may view as a controversial move, traded to the Chicago Blackhawks. What do you make of the move, and how do you view Robin Lehner as the team's number one goaltender going forward?
Yeah, controversial without a doubt, from the respect of sentimentality and the humanity of it. Bill Foley, the owner of the Golden Knights, knows it was not a popular choice. But a winning business is a bottom line business. At the end of the year, one team hoists the Stanley Cup, and if you come in second place, as they know in Vegas, that doesn't really count for anything. So the trick was that, Mark had 1 year left on his deal. Maybe he'd retire after that last year. Bill Foley had told him that he wouldn't be traded anyplace. But again, the bottom line is the Knights needed salary cap space to bring in players like Nolan Patrick, Evgeny Dodonov, Brett Howden, re-sign Alec Martinez, re-sign Matthias Janmark. And not only did they move on from MarcAndre Fleury, they also traded Ryan Reeves, another very popular player in Las Vegas. In a perfect world, in a non-salary cap world, they would have kept those guys and re-signed the pieces that they want. But this isn't Major League Baseball. There is a salary cap, and the Golden Knights had to maneuver with the pieces that they had. MarcAndre Fleury made $7 million. Robin Lehner made $5 million. They actually tried to trade Robin Lehner too. It's not like they put all of their eggs in the MarcAndre Fleury basket and move on from him. They tried to trade Lehner too. It turned out that it didn't happen that way. They did move on from Fleury. Chicago was willing to take him. And there's been some back and forth. George McPhee had said that Fleury's agent, Alan Walsh, had sort of muddied the waters a little bit, putting it out there to teams that, hey, don't take Fleury. He might retire if he comes to you. And that made it difficult for the Golden Knights to do what they needed to do. And in fact, Fleury maybe wasn't really thinking about retirement. So there's been that he said situation going on between the Golden Knights and Fleury's management. And of course, I don't know exactly what was said or what was not said. But The reality is the team needed salary cap space, and people are pissed in Las Vegas. People are not happy that, it's one of those things where, sure, the ultimate goal is to win the Stanley Cup. Bottom line, win the cup. But, I also think of the old phrase, getting there is half the fun. Winning a Stanley Cup championship is great, but what makes it great is the journey to get there. And you want to go on that journey with the people that you've been on the journey with. If all of a sudden somebody jumps out of the car, they're no longer on the journey with you. And is that championship, is the ultimate destination feel the same if the journey isn't quite the same? I can understand that. But George McPhee and Kelly McCrimmon are tasked with building a Stanley Cup championship team. And if the team continues to win, as they have the last few years since they started, that they hope will keep the bulk of the fan base on board. And, that at some point, MarcAndre Fleury would have retired, would have moved on one way or another. This just happens to be a jarring way to end his tenure in Vegas. But let's face it, all things being equal, with Robin Lehner as the next goalie for the Knights, I mean, he's 7 years younger than Fleury is, roughly. Mm-hmm. So he's going to be in the NHL when Fleury is retired, and the Golden Knights had to make that pivot toward the future and make the pivot towards making a salary cap decision.
So you brought up the name of a guy who in Philadelphia is all too familiar with us, Nolan Patrick. He didn't work out with us. He was the second pick. He had struggled with health. He couldn't really get on the ice. But have you been impressed from what you've seen from Nolan so far this season?
I was impressed what he showed during power play, especially in the preseason and during preseason practices. It hasn't really come together in the regular season in 2 games, not a ton of opportunities. And we have already mentioned the injuries. But that was a big problem for the Golden Knights last year, where they had the 3rd best offense in the regular season, but the 22nd ranked power play. Think about that. Well, the good news is they're scoring a lot of even strength goals. The bad news is you can't be tied for the best record in hockey, as they were with Colorado, and have the 22nd ranked power play. Meanwhile, penalty kill, number 1. Obviously, the goals against average was number 1. The Jennings Trophy for Lehner and Fleury, and then Fleury wins the Vezina. So everything is really, really good in those key categories, except for the power play. What are you going to do to address it? Well, they did a lot of stuff to try to address it in the abbreviated season and during the playoffs. Nothing worked. And what happened was in the 3rd round against Montreal, when they really needed a power play goal, they didn't get it. So what do? You try to bring in players that can bring another wrinkle to the power play. Enter Nolan Patrick and Evgeny Dadonov. And when you talk about Patrick, it's a willingness to occupy the net front with some skill and sort of with reckless abandon. And I don't want to say that he's reckless, but he almost doesn't care how big the other guy is who's trying to shove him out of the way. Nolan Patrick is the same age as Cody Glass, who the Golden Knights exchanged in that deal. Glass ends up at Nashville, obviously, sort of 3 teams involved in the trade. But Patrick looks physically bigger. If you didn't look at his face, because he has still sort of a younger face, but if you didn't look at his face and you just saw his frame and the way he positions himself on the ice, you'd think him to be someone a bit older than was Cody Glass, who could not do the same thing. He would get pushed out of those areas. And maybe it was a mental thing, maybe it was a physical thing. Either way, Knights needed somebody there like Nolan Patrick that could provide a different wrinkle on the power play. And in the preseason, it looked like a totally different team. Only 1 or 2 different players, but Patrick was the guy, it seemed to me, that allowed things to look so different and find success. Again, that's the preseason. Nobody cares about the preseason. It's a tune-up for the regular season. We'll see how it unfolds. Pete DeBoer has said, hey, you don't want to read into 1 game or a couple of games or a week or 2. Power play, penalty kill will be something we address every game throughout the season. And just because it has a good start or a poor start doesn't mean that it's fixed. And that also doesn't mean that it's broken. But I think to answer your question, Patrick has the renewed opportunity here. I have been impressed with his power play presence, but he's going to figure some things out. It's a new team. It's a new system. Even Alex Pietrangelo struggled when he came over from St. Louis. Took him some time to adapt to a new coach, new systems and that sort of thing. And now Patrick has to deal with a bunch of his line mates getting injured and going up and down and all that stuff. So we'll see how it plays out. I'd give it some time.
Yeah, certainly us both being Philly guys, definitely rooting for Nolan and hoping for all the best for him. But Dan, before we let you go, we got to ask you one last question. We need your Stanley Cup final pick. Who's going to be in it, and who's going to win it?
Oh wow. Well, I suppose I don't normally make predictions, but for you guys, I'll make an exception, and we'll since I am wearing a Golden Knights shirt here, jacket, I'll have to say the Golden Knights will be in the final to represent the West. And since the Lightning have won it the last 2 years, and I used to work for that organization, I say the Lightning again come out of the East, try to go for a three-peat. So if I were forced into a prediction, Jacob and Jacob, I'd go Vegas and Tampa sometime in late June or early July, whenever this upcoming postseason concludes.
Well, there it is, and we got it on video, so can always come back to it.
Very good. Well, yeah, no, just if I come up way short, I'm sure you'll burn the tape.
Yeah, don't worry.
Well, thank you so much again. We really appreciate you coming on today.
Oh, Jacob, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, and congratulations on your success. I wish you both the very best in your career growth and in your program here, and I look forward to seeing what you guys do next.